Night shifters, ever witnessed a paranormal activity? If so, what was it? I used to work at a 24-hour subway. I know, great start to a paranormal experience story, huh? Well, one day I was doing the dishes, and my coworker was cleaning the toaster oven and bread oven. Out of nowhere, around 3:30 a.m., I heard our door chime go off. Out of habit I say, "Welcome to Subway," as I turn the corner. Nobody there. Coworker gone. I thought, okay, maybe he hopped the counter and went for a cigarette outside, as he did from time to time. Heading back to the sink to finish the dishes, I hear the door chime again. Nobody. Check the bathrooms. Nobody. What the hell? I ignore the dishes, and stand at the front counter, eyeing the doors. Couple minutes later, my coworker comes through the back door where we get our deliveries. "Where do you go?" I asked him, turning towards the back door area. "To take out the trash," he replies. Door chime. He does the same thing as me, "Welcome to Subway," turns corner to see nobody there, but this time the door was wide open. Our doors are weighted to where they'll close on their own if you let go of them. Door stayed open for a couple minutes as we stared. Then suddenly slammed. Not a windy night, and our doors wouldn't even stay open like that on the windiest of days. Have no idea what caused this, or why it happened on that particular night, but after I got a different job I was told it never happened again. Told my boss about the incident and we all looked at the cameras. Nobody could explain it. I worked at a movie store in college. I was closing one night and just kind of doing a final walk through. I kept hearing what sounded like movie cases shuffling. I looked around thinking maybe someone had came in last minute, although I didn't hear the bell ring for when someone enters the store. Didn't see anyone. Then I hear what sounds like a movie fall off a shelf in the kids section. I go over and there's a movie laying on the ground, and I shit you not, it was Casper. I was working at a gas station at like 3 a.m. one night. A car pulled into the pump, guy got out and started pumping, and then the car and dude just vanished. I was looking right at it, and it just popped out of existence. I told my boss the next day and she turned white as a sheet. She'd seen the same thing, same exact description, same car, same pump, same guy. I worked the front gate at a military installation. The night shift is super dull and quiet where I am at. For a while I noticed this dark green old Ford Bronco that would roll up. When I would stand out the gate shack, the car would do a 180 and leave. This happened about 2 to 3 times until I finally caught the license plate before it turned. I ran the numbers to my supervisor. He asked me if I was sure. I said I'm 100% certain. He tells me it couldn't be because the numbers led to a vehicle crash report that involved the exact same vehicle and plate number to which the driver had died and the vehicle was totaled. That shit made me want to switch to days. Not me, but a friend used to work as a night custodian for an elementary school, which the building itself was rather old, built in the 40s maybe. He was the third shift guy, so he took over from the second shift guy at like 9 p.m. He was basically there to mop the floors and make sure no one broke in. If he got all of his stuff done, he was pretty much free to do whatever he wanted. Often after he finished doing his work, he'd go hang out in an office because there was a small TV to watch. He said things started off innocently enough. Lights turning on in classrooms where he knew they had been off previously, cabinets and doors opening and closing on their own. He didn't pay much attention to it at first. He was sort of on the fence as to where he believed in paranormal activities, so he just shrugged it off as coincidences. At first, he would go and check the noises out. Sometimes he'd creep around and try to catch someone in the act, in case there was a way in that he didn't know about. After a month or so, he gave up looking and just learned to ignore it. He'd ask his boss about it and just get blown off. Over the coming months, things progressively got worse. Doors no longer closed on their own, they slammed shut. He heard noises like children playing, sometimes screaming. He'd find trash cans turned upside down. He'd have things thrown at him, but he would be clearly alone with nowhere for someone to hide and throw things at him. He'd contemplated quitting, but he was making good money for being nearly fresh out of high school and he needed the money for family stuff, so he stuck with it. He'd come in, rush through his duties for the night as quickly as he could and then go and sit in the office where he'd turn the TV to where he could sit facing the door, and that's where he'd sit until the morning crew came in at 6 a.m. He didn't want to admit that he was scared shitless of being in that school by himself at night, so he tried to tough it out and made a lot of excuses to try and explain what was going on. The last straw for him was the night he was sitting in the office watching TV and felt someone grab the chair from behind and flip him over backward. There was clearly no one in the room and no way for anyone to get into the room without him seeing them. He picked up the office phone and called his boss at home in the middle of the night, said he quit and he'd come back in the morning to turn his keys in. He was definitely a believer in the paranormal after that experience. He said that it wasn't until years later that he found out from someone who'd researched the history of the school before it was torn down that there used to be a pool inside the school. A number of kids had drowned in over the early years of the school until the administration decided to finally expand the building, so they filled the pool in with concrete and expand over top of it. I was firmly against the idea of paranormal activity prior to working in an old folks' home. You always felt watched. Always. Even when not in view of the camera. But that was the tip of the iceberg. Several times while I was working, things would fly off the walls even though it was unprovoked. I'm talking hand sanitizer containers that flew 15 feet from the wall it was on, cups that were stationary on the counter and all of a sudden flew across the room, and clipboards that just happened to all fall off the walls at once, even though they were across the room from each other. Nothing is as unsettling as Bill in 209. Bill lived in this room while he was a tenant. While someone was visiting, they stayed in room 209. The visitor came downstairs, said that Bill had come into his room, and said, "Don't worry, it's just Bill," while he was in the shower, and then asked who Bill was. We explained that there was no one who lived or worked there named Bill. A couple days later, the same visitor was cleaning out records for the care center, where they worked. As they were doing so, they found that a resident named Bill had lived in room 209. When they told us this story, we all heard a knock on the window and turned to look at it. As we did so, clipboards and bulletin boards flew off the wall on the opposite wall. We've decided that Bill is friendly, but likes attention. He's cool. Used to work at IHOP. A cook before my time got shot and died during robbery. I would always hear someone in the kitchen, such as the spatulas clanking, but nobody would be in the kitchen. Once I saw a black figure in the back, figured it was the cook. When I went outside to the front of the restaurant, the cook was sitting outside smoking. There was no current orders either. Other co-workers experienced some stories. One of them said she felt pushed, but I can't speak on what I didn't see. A lab building where I once worked was the site of a murder-suicide, which happened while I was there. Awful and sad. We didn't have shifts per se, but I had to work late one night autoclaving equipment for the next day's experiment. The autoclave room is right next to the lab where the event took place. I hadn't seen anyone else in the building. After I started the load, I was about to leave the room when I heard a crash outside. I immediately opened the door and saw that all the contents of a table in the hallway had been pushed to the floor. Water bottles, a packet of papers, pens, etc. Since I was right by the door at the time, I would have seen and/or heard someone running away. It was against protocol to leave things in the autoclave overnight, so I had to stay an hour and a half to get them out, but nothing else happened. I left the stuff on the floor, though. Didn't want a repeat of that. I used to work the early shift making bagels 3 a.m., and would sometimes see things in the reflection of my oven that were running around behind me. They looked like chickens. I told a coworker about it and he took me in the back where we stored the flour and pointed at the ceiling. It was completely crusted with some dark brown fuzzy looking substance. He told me the building we were in was once a chicken processing plant. Thousands of chickens had died right there. The stuff on the ceiling was blood and feathers. Not a night shiftier, but my dad kind of was. He was also against the idea of paranormal activity, but now agrees that sometimes there are things that cannot be explained. He was a college student working towards his doctorate in dentistry. However, due to school being expensive as hell, he had to live in a run-down apartment in the bad side of Philly. As a result, he would occasionally wake up at night since he had to scare off several attempted home invaders. Therefore he was a light sleeper, and any kind of noise would instantly wake him up and make him do rounds around the apartment to make sure there were no intruders. After the second or third break in, the gangs learned to stay away from the apartment due to his reputation of becoming Rambo to fight them off. He and his roommate had an old, really freaking old, fridge that had a light that did not work and came with the purchase. This is important to the story. The apartment building was also built in the 1960s but had been converted to a sort of loft house with only one apartment room available for rent. Roommate and him split it into 2 living quarters with a tiny kitchen, bathroom, a basement, and a barred front door with broken glass. The kitchen was directly next to the bedroom and the walls were paper thin. One night, he heard someone moving around in the kitchen. Of course, he snatched up his hunting knife and investigated. The fridge door was open, and the light was on. An old woman wrapped in a shawl was bent over examining the contents. My dad yelled, "Hey!" She turned, and snap. The light went off. She vanished. And the door of the fridge suddenly slammed shut. To this day he has no clue who she was or what she was.